Hello, welcome to episode 34 of Defense Against the Dark Arts. I'm Paul Miil, and this episode is the Ecosystem of Disinformation. I like that. I thought of that when I was reading this book, The Red Thread by Diana West, and I recommend the reading. If we look at how deception and manipulation are being used today, there are many case studies available. I just read this Diana West book, The Red Thread, which is a very well researched, and so I'm just going to use her book as a source for what I'm about to talk about. Not entirely, but source material. So there's a bunch of different sources, but this is like the main source. So Diana demonstrates deep ideological communist threads pervading the people associated with the infamous and bogus Steele dossier from Fusion GPS that mainstream news did everything in their power to convince the people that it was legitimate, despite it being, I shouldn't say knowing, I can't know what other people know, right? But despite it being unverified and bogus. If you're interested in the communist threads and influence in our society, I recommend her book, but I'm going to be focusing more on the techniques we're all being subject to in our daily consumption of news, propaganda, and lies. So McCarthy was garlic to the communist vampires. He was the daylight of transparency that the communists would burn up in. The Russians, or the communists, the Soviets, still today, I guess, it's still there, have the simple technique of disinformation called the big lie. And all they do is call things they don't like a big lie. Right? They do this today, or since the 50s at least. They do this to McCarthy's legacy, right, of his Red Scare, right? Calling him all kinds of names and saying he didn't accomplish anything, when he did in fact find actual bona fide Soviet agents. What's the word I'm looking for? Doesn't matter. So not that the domestic fellow travelers are any less dangerous to the good and virtuous. And for those of you who do not know, communists call each other fellow travelers. Ooh, a little skullduggery there. Hey, fellow traveler. Right? It's like the Masons with their handshakes, right? So the well known, the Soviet tactic is to is used today by our domestic news and our politicians, and that should alarm you. Now, are they using it because it is a powerful tactic of manipulation, or are they using it because it's from their side? A great example is the concept of the deep state. Propagandists will call it a big lie, or today they'll use the term conspiracy theory. And when it comes to deep state, if we look at the definition of deep state, now this is something that you got to be very careful of, because the definitions are always being changed. Like today, they changed the definition of vaccine. They changed the definition of gain of function, amongst other things. I'm sure inoculation will be changed. Right? Why are they changing the definitions of all these words in 1 year? Right? Let's not change, right? It's all about propaganda. Why would you need to change the definition of an established word like vaccine? Right? Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sidetrack. So deep state. They if we look at the definition of what deep state is, it's a group of unelected people in government agencies that manage or control things. They're generally unaffected by elections. So if we look at the fact that there are intelligence agencies, we know they exist, right? Does anybody think intelligence agencies do not exist? Right? We're forced to deduce that there is a deep state. Or generals. Do you think that generals don't exist? Right? They exist. Are they elected? No. There's a deep state, right? Never mind the influences of of big pharma, the influences of big sugar, the influences of any of these lobby groups. Now, do we admit that lobby groups exist? Do we admit that these lobbies, affect influence? Do they last from, government to government? Yeah, they are unelected, right? They are part of the deep state. It's a big thing. It's not like just a little concept of some grannies in a basement somewhere. Oh, the little deep state, with Mr. Burns. What was his first name? Mr. Burns. In this little basement with the skulls, right, controlling the world. No, they're trying to make you think that to make it seem unbelievable. We can't have people being able to simply deduce that, yes, there's a deep state. So what we'll do is we'll try to redefine deep state, or we will smear the definition. We'll create some kind of a straw man definition, and then we'll call that a conspiracy theory, right? So the definition of a conspiracy is simply an agreement. A conspiracy is an agreement between people to form an illegal or wrongful or subversive act. So if couple people get together and they plan to do something wrong, that is a conspiracy, right? And if you're investigating something, you literally have to come up with conspiracy theories of people who, if you knew there was a wrongdoing and it was planned and you're trying to figure out who did it, you literally need to have theories of conspiracies, right? So these things exist, right? The fact that they're conditioning people to think that conspiracies do not exist is mind-blowing. That's like trying to convince people that blue doesn't exist, right? It's a conspiracy theory. Blue does not exist. The sky is not red, right? Anyways. So if you think about the definition of conspiracy as people doing something illegal or something wrong or something subversive, what if you have an ideology where you don't believe in right or wrong? What if you had some kind of a crazy German minister that is an ideological leader who died in 1971, who's an inspiration for many people who are in politics, heads of CIA, directors of FBI, presidents, right? Who this religious leader had said that there is no right and there is no wrong, right? So if you think there's no right and there's no wrong, right? Maybe that's why they think there's no such thing as a conspiracy, because how could you plan between two people to do something wrong when wrong doesn't exist? Therefore, conspiracies don't exist. Maybe that's their logic, right? If you don't believe there is a wrong, then how could a conspiracy exist? Because they're planning to do something wrong when wrong doesn't exist. Therefore, so this could be, maybe that's what maybe they honestly believe conspiracies don't exist because they honestly believe there is no such thing as wrong or illegal or subversive. People are insane. Anyways, conspiracy also means to accomplish something, a legal purpose through an illegal action. So the thing that you're achieving might be legal, which is fine for people who think the ends justify the means, right? And again, with these leaders who are very leftist, right? They believe the ends justify the means at all costs, right? So clearly, conspiracies do exist. To say otherwise is delusional. Now, let's see how they actually define they. And by I mean the enemy. And Wikipedia is infested with propaganda, and normal people can no longer edit it. It's only edited by crazed, woke, leftist intelligence types. Right? If you're any of those, you can edit it. But if you're anybody else, you cannot. Right? So according to Wikipedia, it's the definition. I'm going to read it here, which they say, they start off, right, with according to a discredited conspiracy theory. Bam, right off the top. Right off the top. Right? According to a discredited conspiracy theory. Which discredited conspiracy theory? Which conspiracy theory, and how is it discredited? That's what I want to know. So again, according to Wikipedia, according to a discredited conspiracy theory, a clandestine network of actors in the federal government. Okay. High finance or high industry that operates as a hidden government that exercises power along or within the legitimate elected U.S. government. So, globalists, right? So they put these little words in, right? So, other than the propaganda at the start, according to a discredited conspiracy theory, other than that, their definition is good. I like their definition, right? They try to make it sound spooky. They try to make it seem all bogus, but clandestine means unnoticed by the general population. Right? Check. That's, places I can't say, but there are branches in government where you do things which are unnoticed by the general public. Right. In fact, almost everything that happens in any business or anything is unnoticed by the general population. So that is, by definition, clandestine. Right. Unnoticed by the general population. Doesn't mean everybody doesn't notice it. It means the general population doesn't know it. So, by that definition, this podcast is clandestine because the general population does not know about this podcast. So, high-tech banks or government that are not elected that perform illegal or wrongful acts. So, high-tech, so they're saying, when they high finance, high industry that operates. So, high-tech banks, governments that are not elected, so they obviously have a lot of people in these organizations who are not elected. Now, do these organizations perform illegal or wrongful acts? Well, they definitely have, because they've been found and charged on occasions. So they do or have performed illegal or wrongful acts. And if there's no agreements in high-tech banks or government to perform illegal or just wrongful acts, we should fire every kind of auditor, every kind of investigator that exists, because there's no such thing as conspiracy. So we do not need auditors. We do not need investigators. Fuck, we don't need regulations because there's no conspiracies. Right? We don't need to ring these people in because they're not going to do anything wrong. Right? Who defines this wrong? Now, I'm starting to slide into this whole thing about what is right and what is wrong, right? You get esoteric definitions. But ultimately, it's like the heap fallacy. There are things that are absolutely wrong, and there are things that are absolutely correct. Like if you have two spiders, and then you add two more spiders, you will have 4 spiders. To say there's 5 spiders is wrong. That is wrong. You don't have 5 spiders. There's only 4. How many lights are there? When you add 2 lights and you have 2 other lights, you will have 4 lights. Is there 5 lights? No, there are 4 lights. Right? It is wrong to say that you have 5 lights. So there is right and there is wrong. Now, again, it could be the interpretation, and this is what people do. They interpret things to mean, well, it doesn't mean the literal interpretation. It means the natural interpretation, which, again, this is also a form of intentional deception and fallacy. You could use it on either side. But in fact, we probably wouldn't need the news broadcast either, because they wouldn't need to be reporting on anything, because there's no conspiracy, because there's no people who ever do anything wrong. They don't conspire to do things wrong, right, or illegal. We don't need the police. We don't need nothing. Nobody does nothing wrong because wrong doesn't exist, and there's no conspiracies ever, anywhere. Right? So Dinah West tells us about a discordant but effective Marxist subversion that has been going on in the West for many decades. And all communists are globalists. That, by definition, communists want global domination. Domination. Jesus. Marx, he would mention that, right? If you go back to my podcast on Marx, the guy's an idiot. So I have a book from Cambridge on it's a textbook, Power in Global Governance. It may require several episodes, but I think I'll be covering the evil and deceptive minds of the globalists and how they've perverted the concept of liberalism and infiltrated academia. Liberalism is no longer live and let live. It is now total power at any cost. Deception, right? If we want to frame a class of enemy of the world in general, it would be the academic left and their ideologically brainwashed peons that have been released to the wild. So power at any cost implies priority of power over even their own ideology, which is what we hear from these monsters. It is in essence only about power. They'll pretend that it's not. Here I am with some babies. You'll have politicians giving babies candies or whatever. I don't know. But, it's all smoke and mirrors. And we all know this, right? Some people apparently don't, but of course we do, right? So obviously society is not all sociopaths infatuated with power. But that's the target demo of manipulators and propagandists, right? Those are the people that are easiest to manipulate. If the carrot is power, right? Here you go, you little psychopath. You want some power, right? Just do this. And they're like rats to cheese, right? Or rats to whatever. So perhaps natural selection is rewarding their infatuation with power. If so, and the honest, moral people die off, right? Because the power-hungry people are getting more power, and the moral people are just, living and let living, right? So the more powerful, if you extrapolate, right, they will maybe start doing better, and the other people start dying off. So humanity will evolve into a race of sociopathic monsters, right? If we extrapolate, it may or may not. It's a complex system, but who am I to judge, right? Diana West gives a nice overview of the strata, the layers of conspiracies that are in this entire campaign of disinformation, this Steele dossier campaign by their Gates, not Bill Gates, although his last name is appropriate, right? So we have the Steele dossier, which is called Dossier Gate, right? Dossier Gate. Throwing the investigation into Hillary's private servers is called Servergate. Rigging the bogus investigation based on a bogus dossier is the FISA-gate. Engaging in domestic espionage is Spygate. And then tying a bow on the legacy of this whole campaign with Muellergate. Mueller. If you've been paying attention and don't know about these specific conspiracies, don't worry about it. It's not critical. Nie krytyczna. What is critical is, according to West, this conspiracy is perpetrated by networks so powerful that it is unlikely that their members will even worry about being charged with sedition or the like. A thriving and resilient ecosystem of disinformation. Who are these people? Lately, it's been totalitarian, leftist globalists, what we used to just call communists, because communists are leftists and they're globalists, right? But then people try to subdivide. I'm not communist, I'm a Leninist. I'm not communist, I'm a Marxist. I'm not communist. So yeah, okay, there might be gradations, but you're all leftist shit, right? So the fight is nationalists versus globalists. But the nationalists are mostly unaware that they are even in a fight. Such is the way of information warfare. Now let's look at a set piece here, a specific example from Diana's book. This guy named Derek. Our files on this guy indicate that he was a professor of political science. And according to West, the Free Bacon dug this correspondence out of his papers from Brown University in 2016. The letter, I think, was written in 1992. So Derek writes, I began working behind the scenes with Cody, his brother, and Sid to attack your enemies. Now, I'm removing the last names, right? So, but they're there, and this is documented. So, I briefed Carville on how to attack Songus before James took off for Georgia. I spoke almost every day of the campaign with Cody and Sid, as well as with Susan, to work on defense tactics on the issue. For the New York primary, I coordinated with Mickey and George the attacks on Jerry. I also leaked uncomplimentary material on him to the press. So far we got this guy. Attack your enemies, attack Songus, leaked uncomplimentary material, right? This Derek guy. I was very successful working with Cody and Sid on the Perot problem. I coordinated their investigative work on Perot. So he coordinated their investigative work. And I know that our work played a crucial role in getting Perot to drop out of the race in July. I also worked with Cody on dealing with other matters. Cody was very effective in scaring off some of the Bush campaign's potential attacks on you because of the material that he had on Bush. So this is information warfare. After the letter, Clinton gave Scheer an ambassador post, I think it was to Finland, for 4 years, right? What a hero, right? So according to West, Derek's brother Cody may have perfected the mechanics of delivering unsubstantiated information to the media. In 1992, he successfully shopped around unvetted allegations that Vice President Dan Quayle had purchased illegal narcotics as a law student and U.S. Senator. Despite the DEA, the LA Times, 60 Minutes, and others stating that there was nothing to it, other media coverage persisted. So this guy, Dan Hewitt, who was the executive producer of 60 Minutes, explained the story's creation according to the Courier News, November 7th, 1991. The article reads, Hewitt said a Washington-based freelance writer, Cody, I will still remove his last name, brought the allegations that Quayle had purchased drugs in Indiana to 60 Minutes. Hewitt said his staff ascertained that the allegations were unfounded, but Cody later took them to at least 2 newspapers. Cody had been trying to get this story placed somewhere, Hewitt said. He finally talked Gary into doing it. So this Gary guy was at a newspaper. He's actually a pretty famous guy. Sort of famous. Not really famous, but famous enough. So this is how they work. This is the techniques, the swamp, right in D.C. So method 1 is get unfounded smears into incompetent or friendly media that will not bother substantiating your unfounded story. Step 2, other media will cite the original incompetent media, making it sound authentic. Step 3, chain reaction of repetition of the lies by the media who do not report the story, but now they report that the original paper reported the story or just reported it as fact. So you get stories that Washington Post reported this, right? So they're not saying that, they're not reporting on this. They're reporting that Washington Post reported on it. So they're trying to cover their ass. Which, whatever. So idiot people, step 4. Idiot people consume unsubstantiated garbage and believe it when it is proven to be lies. So step 5 now. We know it's bullshit, right? If legally challenged, print a tiny retraction. Else keep running with it or just let it die, depending on the situation, right? These are the 5 steps of this type of smear campaign, this type of manipulation on a broad scale, right? So this is over and above propaganda of op-eds, which are mostly just, disinformative. Jesus, disinformative. Is that even a word? It's mostly disinformation propaganda, but it's disinformative propaganda. I guess propaganda could be, disinformative propaganda. That's a word I just made. Put that in the dictionary before they change the definition to mean something else. So this is this is in the official news stream of legacy corporate media. So it's not op-eds where it's propaganda. This is the mainstream news feeds reporting this. So people tend to believe it, which we shouldn't, because we know it's bullshit, right? But we don't know when they're telling us, right? Unless you look into it. Most people don't have time. They don't care, whatever, right? So this is beyond manipulative distortion of headlines and lies by omission. This is propagating unsubstantiated and therefore compromised information. This information you don't trust, but these guys love pushing it out there, right? Especially, right, if it's along with their narrative, their ideology. If they went to University of Chicago or some other communist hellhole. It's not just corrupt officials, right? This is going to the ecosystem of disinformation. It's not the person who just wrote the bullshit. It's not the paper who agreed to print the unsubstantiated stuff. It's the whole supply chain, right? All the other people that are all ideologically aligned pushing this. So it is an ecosystem. And the leftist ideology has always been, as it is today, to win at all costs. There is no right, there is no wrong. 2 + 2 can equal 5 if it pushes the ideology forward. The entire leftist ideology is sacrilegious towards critical thinking and objective reality. They'll say as much, unless they're lower on the useful idiot chain and they don't know any better, right? Or if they're higher up, they know how to use propaganda to lie about it, right? At all costs. At all costs. Another example of this type of pushing unverified stories is, of course, the Steele dossier, which is surprising, or perhaps eye-opening to those who see the size and depth, the scope, the scale of this ecosystem of disinformation. So this bogus, without going too far into details about the background of it, read Diana West's book. It's really interesting. So this bogus dossier of 16 memos created by someone, somewhere, paid for by the Hillary campaign and the DNC, which the news media would not tell us, right, or parts thereof, funneled funds to the Fusion GPS via the law firm of Perkins & Coie. Diana goes into great detail exposing the communist links with so many of the scumbags involved. Fusion GPS apparently provided this dossier to David, who gave it to Senator McCain, who gave it to FBI Director James Comey. But that wasn't good enough, so David pushed the unverified garbage to the quality outfit known as BuzzFeed, who released the salacious and unverified garbage into the public domain. Since the story was fabricated, BuzzFeed clearly could not have done their due diligence in trying to verify the unverified garbage story. Even though the FBI and everyone else knew it was bogus, it was still pushed by the corporate media for years without verification. 4 years. Or 3.5, whatever. And worse, at that point, they had to have known. If they were, professionals, they would have known it was bogus, right? It's their job. And if they didn't, if they couldn't verify it, why are they publishing it, right? A lot of people involved in the disinformation campaign of the Steele dossier appear to be pro-Soviet or communist apologists. Apologists? Yeah, I guess that's a word. Scumbags. Diana West wrote about another disinformation campaign that was unleashed against one of her books that analyzed the Russian influence. So 2 Russian expert assholes, we'll call Harvey and John, argued that there was very little indicating successful policy manipulation. So they argued that there was very little that indicated successful policy policy manipulation. So what they mean, policy manipulation, Western policy, United States policy manipulation by Russians or Soviets before them. David's brother wrote an op-ed in Washington Post that it was a surprising misconception that intelligence agents really even attempted what Harvey and John called policy manipulation. So they're saying, right? Did they really even attempt it? Right? It's a surprising misconception that these agents really even tried it. So what is it? Did they even try it? Did they really even try it? I was looking at the weasel words. Right? Obviously, they did try it, right? Obviously, there's all kinds of successful Russian, right? Hold on a sec. What's with this whole dossier? Wasn't the dossier all about? Didn't this dossier that these people are all fighting to say is true is actually saying that there was successful, right, policy manipulation? They're manipulating the election. They manipulated Trump's policies, right? And yet they're saying, oh, come on. After all that, right, we're going to pretend that didn't happen, right? There was no real policy manipulation by Russians or Soviets, right? Especially in academia. They don't want you looking. What these experts are trying to do is erase the story. They're trying to erase the mechanism. They're trying to erase the impact of the subversion of our institutions. Recall, the experts claim there's never been Russian influence. They claim the Russians miraculously have influenced the 2016 election, and they influenced Trump, and hence they influenced U.S. policy. Then after 2020, they claim the election fraud. Anybody who mentions election fraud about the 2020 election is a conspiracy nut, right? And there's never been Russian influence on U.S. policy or institutions. So their stories are incongruent. Either there has been influence or there has never been influence. They claim both, but they pretend that people don't have memories. They treat you like you're an idiot that can't remember longer than 2 months. So this guy, Whittaker Chambers, is a former communist member and a Soviet spy. He wrote in his memoir called Witness that gaining influence was more important than gaining information. Gaining influence was more important than gaining information. So they're not about getting the blueprints of some, silent sub. They're about influencing policy, which makes sense, right? If you could control them, you don't give a shit what they're making. They'll make what you tell them to make, right? You control them, right? Influence. That power to influence policy has always been the ultimate purpose of the Communist Party's infiltration, according to Whittaker Chambers. Chambers stated that the assignment of the GRU agent Alger Hiss, who worked in the U.S. State Department, was to mess up policy. Now, this contemporary hero, James O'Keefe, had a documentary called Unmasking the Deep State. It features self-described communists inside the federal government bragging about doing the same thing. He, just the other day, James O'Keefe's home and business was raided by the FBI because he did not print. Somebody gave him a dossier and he could not verify it, and unlike BuzzFeed and all these other scumbag things, he did not publish it. And yet the FBI, he gave it to the police. They gave it to him. Somebody gave him this dossier, we'll call it, and he looked at it. He could not verify it, so he couldn't print it. So he gave it to who? The local police. He gave it to the authorities. And so what happens? A year later, the FBI storms and raids his fucking business. Tell me that's not political. It was a fucking Joe Biden's daughter's diary. Since when is the FBI investigating lost diaries? And why would they investigate a guy who did not publish the diary? It's almost like, what? How come you didn't publish the diary that we gave you? Right? That was unsubstantiated, right? You're supposed to do it, like all media, right? They all publish unsubstantiated information. That's what you do as media, This is like the what? Right? It is insane. It does not make sense. It is so banana republic to have Joe Biden, the president of the United States, using the politically FBI to do his political dirt to go after people who he just doesn't agree with politically. And, you know, this honest, they disagree with James O'Keefe because he's honest, right? He's about shining a light. So what do? Let's send the FBI after him, because that's what the FBI should do. I mean, Epstein, right? Pedophile Island, atrocious things going on. Nothing. Zero. White on rice. Go after James O'Keefe, but don't go after the scumbag Epstein, right? The FBI is disgusting and politically based, and I do not trust the FBI at all. They have demonstrated that they are untrustworthy and politically based. It should be noted that the bogus Steele dossier was used by the FBI and the DOJ they presented it to the FISA court for authorization to spy on Trump's campaign. So they used a bogus dossier as a reason to investigate a presidential candidate's campaign. So the FISA is a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is a law mandating the procedures for investigating persons suspected of being foreign spies or involved in terrorism. So this ecosystem of disinformation has been used by both Republicans with 9/11, Bush, you know, the whole go to Iraq thing, right? And Democrats for pretty much everything else that's ever happened, right? But in recent years, there has been a constant totalitarian left ideological narrative that's becoming more obvious in the EOD, the Ecosystem of Disinformation. Diana West goes into much more detail about the Red Thread, and I recommend her book, again, if you're interested or not. You should still read it. Granted, she does pull out some manipulative techniques like implication by association. You know, if you put things side by side, it kind of taints the one thing, right, by having it right next to something else. I've noticed that. And she's been using, but she hasn't been sued, right? And she has tomes of citations. So she is definitely a voice worth listening to. And if you want a detailed background about the Fusion GPS scandal that is still happening today, that you will not get from corporate media, her book, Red Thread, is a must. She exposes the reality, that reality is more complex than our assumptions might have us believe. Almost nothing is black and white. To include a few more of the Russian tactics of manipulation, we would have to include the assassinations and beating deaths of inconvenient people. Well, Putin, appears to be not a fan of oligarchs. He appears to be less a fan of Western academic pro-communist billionaires. They're fine for useful idiots, but hands off of Putin's pie. Right? That seems to be the message, right? The Russians, of course, are masters of disinformation. They literally invented the word. And one of their techniques is the big lie, which is essentially any nefarious act by the regime that is talked about as, they call it a big lie. So useful idiot Russian apologists and Western academia scramble over themselves to repeat whatever the Kremlin propaganda is. Oh, that's a big lie. We didn't do that. We didn't kill all those Ukrainians. Oh, we didn't starve them. No. Oh, the Bolsheviks are nice people. Right? Oh, we're not murderers. We don't line up intelligentsia and shoot them in the back of the head. No, we're the nice Bolsheviks. Right? Oh, these morons. And academia. It's a thing. They should know better. Right? So they've been ideologically compromised. West writes how those on the outside of conspiracies will generally have a tough time determining the command and control structure of it. So who's in charge? Who's paying? Is it domestic? Where's their HQ? Is it in Langley? Is it in the Kremlin? Is it in the World Bank? According to West, former CEI director John Brennan once wrote, "If democracy is a process rather than a state, the democratic process may involve at some point the violation of personal liberties and procedural justice." The violation of procedural justice, the violation of personal liberties. That's John Brennan's democratic process. James Comey wrote, he, the Christian, he was referring to the antecedent to he is Christian in this sentence, he must be willing to sin in the name of justice. He must be willing to sin in the name of justice. So their own ideology, their own values are second to the name of justice. Now, how is he defining the name of justice? Is the name of justice power for their ideology? Right? This explains a lot. This is how the deep state thinks.